was there a time that you thought God really used you? You know, usually we do the modesty thing as preachers. We know, but there is the side of us that I'm just thankful God really used me today. So when might the time that be?
There are a number of times in worship, and sometimes they're not always preaching moments. This past Sunday, I felt that God really used me, and actually I wasn't preaching. I had received a couple of inbox messages from members who were asking for prayer about specific situations. And so as I was pondering their request, because both of them attend our 10 o'clock service, and praying about it and thinking about where in our worship I would, call them up for prayer, I believe it was the Spirit that spoke to me and said, just call for prayer for people that might have special needs. And of course, I did, and the rest is history. There was a great move of God in worship that day, this past Sunday, and there was really no preaching. It was just obedience to the Spirit of God. But what really blessed me that day, because sometimes when you do those things in worship, when people are used to a certain structure and a certain format, I know what I believe I hear God saying, but I also know what it may feel like and look like to people who came for worship with different expectations. And I had opened the doors of the church, extended the invitation to discipleship, and several people came up to unite with the church. I was about to lift the offering, and 3 of our young men who work in media were coming down the aisle. Millennials. Wow. And they were coming down, 2 millennials and 1 teenager was coming down the aisle. And so they came down and requested prayer. And but as they were about to take them to the back, I said, keep them out here. I want us to pray for them as a congregation. While we were praying for them, another young man came up. And as we were praying, I could just see him breaking under the power of God. And we just began to pray and minister to him. Well, a few minutes later, another man came up and began to cry and pray, and he was just hugging him. Well, as it turned out, it was his son. And he had been praying for his son to come back to the Lord. And it was just a great time of rejoicing. But I knew in that moment, when that happened, I knew in that moment that God had used me because I had been obedient to what the Lord had instructed me to do in that particular moment. The other moment that I believe that really comes to mind about when God used me was also at Hampton, and this was at night. And this was the second night after I preached. I preached that Luke 13 passage. And when I sat down, I was thinking to myself, I said, I don't know if I made any sense or not tonight. And I, looked up, and there's a section where some of the preachers sit in a section. And I looked up, and Dr. Jeremiah Wright was looking at me. And I could see nobody but him. And he was standing there with his finger, giving me the thumbs up. And I just grabbed my towel and started weeping.
Lost it, huh?
Right. Because, I can't even describe what that did for me in that moment. And of course, I think I must have sat there maybe 5 or 10 minutes just weeping. Just literally weeping, because to have a general like that, I'm about to weep now, a general like that to take a moment and just affirm what I had done, and to do that publicly just blessed me. And of course, behind that, there was like just an afterglow that swept through the center. And finally, I left. People started praising God. They started dancing and shouting and running around the worship center. And I finally left, and I got to my room. And about, I don't know, it must have been maybe after 11 o'clock that night, I called one of my church members, and I said, I was just checking to make sure that they made it back to the hotel. And they said, we're just getting back to the room. I said, from church? They said, Pastor, it was explosive. So I would say that night, when it wasn't that I was looking for his affirmation, but it's like God used him to let me know that God was pleased. Yeah, I will never forget that.